Well, seems like I just can't quit it. Just when you think things are becoming slightly more normal, some stupid shit happens. Rick Beato released a video called "The Real Reason Why Music is Getting Worse," or some stupid title like that. It got a lot of attention online because Rick Beato has an outsized amount of attention for the size of his thoughts. The boomers felt validated and the Coomers were condescending to the boomers, you know, the internet. Anthony Fantano decided to make a response to Rick Beato's video that I think was partly good, partly unfortunate, and partly just straight up bad faith. I have a lot of thoughts on both videos, more than can fit into one video, because this is an extremely complicated topic that has multiple facets to it that need a lot of time to sit down and tease out the nuances of. It could use its own video series. Rick has been releasing these half-baked commentary videos for a while now, some of which are actually pretty decent. Other ones are not very good. The fact that people are now just catching on to the fact that Rick Beato really might not know everything of what he's talking about is hilarious to me. It's like how the media are magically discovering that Joe Biden is in fact a corpse. But enough of this precursor crap, let's start exploring Fantano's video.
I just don't really feel like these are good pieces of content, and the cases they make are illogical. They are not coherent, and frankly, for somebody who is as smart and as studied and as experienced as Rick, I feel like the statements made in these videos are beneath him.
Dude, that's been his rant videos for like the last 5 years. Is it beneath Rick? Yeah, definitely. But I mean, his videos have been shower thought videos for so long. I mean, to give him some credit, it seems like in this video, he tried to organize his thoughts a little bit more and tried to put a little bit more effort into the video production rather than the usual thing that he does, which is just like, I'm gonna shit out all of my hot takes in video form and rake in the views. I'm going to print money with the least amount of effort possible, and everyone will think I am the greatest music YouTuber of all time. Fricking fabulous. But at the end of the day, you have to keep in mind that most of Rick's rant or commentary videos are really more shower thoughts than anything else. I don't know if this is how he or his audience perceives it, but that's what it is. This video is more of the same, just with a nice polish of, you know, a little bit of video production on top of that.
I feel like one of the major failings of these two pieces of content, especially the first one, is that they are so frigging choppy. They kind of jump from one point to one scene to the next, and a lot of what is being argued across the first video isn't even really bolstered. A lot of these points are just like kind of put out there, and they're meant to be just like kind of accepted without much scrutiny.
Yes, absolutely. Again, they're shower thoughts.
Given how surgical some of Rick's content can be, I feel like is just like not a reflection of his full potential, and like really the knowledge that I know he has access to for somebody who is as technologically savvy as he is and is as experienced as he is.
Okay, you definitely do not watch a lot of Rick Beato videos. The fundamental problem that Fantano seems to be alluding to here is that Rick does not seem to know how to test his own arguments. He is not the great at asking himself questions that actually probe his own held beliefs. For the record, this is a very difficult thing to do that takes a lifetime to practice, and most people still are not very good at it. But yeah, I don't think Rick Beato is a very rigorous thinker, and that's completely fine. He's a musician, he's a producer. This is not his strong suit. This is not something he has to do in order to make art or be a good technician. And the people that just take what Rick says as if it's the truest thing because he's the authority that they appeal to are not the kind of people that are going to be convinced by a strong argument, because if they were, they would not just gobble Rick's slop all the time. So it's not like I see Rick as like making things worse with this video. It's just no action's gonna be taken from this. Boomers are gonna boom no matter what. This video is a P.A.'s Day circle jerk. So fundamental problem, do not approach Rick as a philosopher or a thought leader. Approach him as an old studio dog who is monologuing about his point of view. Rick then goes on in his video to use Frank Sinatra as an example of why it was so difficult to make music back in the day.
Frank Sinatra used to get up in front of an orchestra and sing a vocal take, and they had one microphone. And they would get it balanced just right. Frank would say, okay, I'm ready to do it, and he'd sing it.
Come fly with me. Fantano then in his video tries to refute this claim by saying that because there was a whole studio system and team around Frank Sinatra doing not just the production, but the writing, the performances, blah, 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 that it was actually very easy for Frank Sinatra to make music. And he says, easy as pie.
When we're talking about like ease of creation here, specifically in regards to Frank Sinatra, I feel like Rick is kind of overlooking the fact that like there was a whole like system of support behind an artist like Frank, allowing for what he was doing to be as easy as pie, essentially. I mean, for sure, he had to sing well when he was in front of the microphone. That much is true. But Frank also had loads of producers and sound engineers and orchestra musicians, as well as arrangers and, also songwriters. So that when old Blue Eyes stepped up to the microphone to do his thing, his songs weren't trash.
And I have to just stop and drop my jaw in absolute awe of how Fantano could hilariously miss the entire point of the statement. Rick was not saying Frank Sinatra personally had it harder as an artist than artists do today. He's talking about how hard it was to make a recorded song. That was very obvious. You literally built your entire point around referencing the team that Frank Sinatra had to use to make a well-recorded sounding song back in the day, which literally proves Rick's point. It is the proof that it was way harder to do that shit back in the day because Frank couldn't just pop into the studio by himself, set up a microphone, and have a whole finished product. It took a large team of people with their man hours, experience, knowledge, and enough money to pay for all of that crap, plus the facilities. That's a one-person job today. One freaking dude. And it used to be like a 40-person job, and it used to be way more expensive.
For somebody who is as smart and as studied and as experienced as Fantano, given how surgical some of Fantano content can be, I feel like the statements made are beneath him.
I struggle to believe that you're that stupid, Fantano. Like, truly. I can't believe how hard you whiffed that. It was pretty clear what Rick was talking about. Rick then goes into talking about quantizing drums and then capturing a guitar tone versus using a virtual rig. All of this driving towards his main thesis, which is
the creative dependency on technology limits the ability of people to innovate, I believe. Could be wrong about that. Maybe it helps them innovate. I don't think so, though.
Just by looking at his body language and how he immediately questions what just came out of his mouth, if that was actually like correct or not, you can tell these are shower thoughts. I think realizing that these are shower thoughts, Fantano could have probably approached this with a little more charity. We'll get to that. But then also the fact that Rick thought it was a good idea to not have this completely thought out, to make such bold statements and claims, and then to just, I don't know, put it on frickin' camera for all of the internet to see as if it's this like grand conversation starter. This should give you all of the context of how seriously to take this video. So first, let's explain why what Rick said is blatantly wrong, but then let's reframe it. Let's steel man Rick so that he would agree with what I'm gonna say, in order to make the best case possible. And then we'll move on to Fantano again. The creative dependence on technology limits the ability of people to innovate. This is just a clearly wrong statement. Again, I'm going to steelman him, but let's talk about what's wrong first. Technology is something that humans have been developing since their entire existence. It makes a process take less man hours for a desired result, or it makes something that was impossible suddenly possible. Just the wording of this position is nonsensical. The creative dependence on technology limits the ability of people to innovate. Does the guitar become less creative because the Chinese gunqin is several thousand years older? It's less technologically advanced. Is an electric guitar less creative than a Baroque guitar? I think almost everyone would say that the electric guitar is more creative than the Baroque guitar because you have a much wider palette of timbre expression to dive into. Given that the end of this phrase is limits the ability of people to innovate, combined with all the previous examples that he was talking about, I think this gives us a clue as to what Rick was actually trying to say. So let's reframe and steelman Rick's position in the best faith way possible. I'm about to do a lot of reading, so hopefully this doesn't bore you, but I think Rick's position is: the current advancement in music technology has made it take far less time and knowledge to make marketable music. this is beginning to dehumanize music. The steps it took to achieve a result in the analog space with hardware, connections, knob settings are being reduced to under-the-hood algorithms to get a similar result in a more user-friendly fashion. Because of this, one, people don't have a fundamental understanding of how or why these results are happening. They also don't have access to altering any of them underneath the hood. Therefore, less sound experimentation will take place. And less experimentation will result in more music all sounding the same. Two, algorithms are built to create a desired end result determined by the manufacturer, not by the artist. In order to maintain quality control and consistency, and they're hoping for that being user satisfaction, the algorithms limit the user's ability to screw things up, to mess with the formula that works, in quotes. This results in a plug and play culture of music creation. People who are fine with something that sounds like all of their heroes, and this drives people away from finding their own voice. This also minimizes the talent needed to achieve a desirable result. This results in lower talent music that doesn't understand the nuances of composition, arrangement, production, and how these three processes all interplay with one another. A large portion of the talent, both in sound design and in performance, is purchased as a plugin designed by someone else's voice and standard. The same way that placing a microphone on an amp changes the EQ curve of the entire guitar tone so that any post-processing is all colored with this sonic character, is similar to how there is a layer of mix-ready plugins and presets that colors all of the art that we make today. And less people have the knowledge to explore outside of those boundaries. Usually a machine's goal is predictable, reproducible results. This frees up human resources to be applied elsewhere, but humans are not as precise as machines. When you see a guitarist going for a wicked solo live, part of the appeal is the competency, but part of it is the risk of failure. Seeing a fellow human do something elevated above our mundanity is part of the beauty. But sometimes part of the appeal is the humanity, the inconsistencies or the imperfections. This is where passionate emotions get communicated. Music made perfectly in time or in tune, predictable and stable, provides more of a sense of calm. The exciting stuff comes from those expectations being subverted, but also by how they're subverted. We lose the human quality of making beautiful mistakes or accidental discoveries when our technology keeps us on such strict safety bumpers. It also can limit certain parameters of emotional expression. Okay, so this is the best job I could do steel manning Rick's position. Now let's show you why that's not really the case. Okay, so we're gonna listen to a little clip here of a demo that I'm working on for my band right now. Pay attention to this synthesizer. Not as easy to hear in this section, but you'll hear it more as we come up to the next one. Pretty funky tone, right? It's gnarly, a little outside the box. Could maybe be confused for a guitar, right? All right, so now let's go back and let's listen to it soloed up. If we look here at what I used a preset and ran it through an amp simulator. That's without the simulator. That's through the amp simulator, and it's a one knob. So then after that, I ran it through yet more effects. That's without the effects on it. That's adding a weird chorus. That's adding saturation, and that's bringing it in to the stereo space a little bit thinner. So that entire thing was done with a preset on the synthesizer and with strict guide rails from that amp simulator that's a one knob. Not to mention a pretty simple preset on the chorusing, which maybe I fuddled with the knobs a little bit. But honestly, I mean, it's the fact that I was tinkering with all of this random stuff that were quote-unquote presets, but I was just messing around with the signal chain that produced something so wild and not quite like anything you'd heard before. Even with using this really simple technology that gets you to awesome sounds right out the box, if you start layering things together and tinkering around, you will come up with something different if that's actually your desire, is to come up with something different. Rick did caveat his statement with saying, I'm not sure this is true, and I kind of resonate with that. There's a part of me that wants to agree with Rick, and then there's another part of me that's like, but no, that's not really true. On one hand, there is very real music homogenization taking place, and I think music tech is a part of that problem. But on the other hand, I really don't think music tech is going to stop tinkerers from tinkering. Creatives will always go in and tinker. They're always going to touch things they're not supposed to touch and experiment. That's the nature of us. I think the current music tech is allowing more people who don't really have the creative bug or music competency to enter into the music space in a more competent way than ever before. And I think that has pros and cons. So on one hand, I agree with Rick's sentiment. Yes, this is contributing to the problem of music homogenization. But I fundamentally think that it's a problem of the users before it's a problem of the technology, and Fantano agrees with that. A big part of that is our culture, but we'll address that a little later. Okay, so having extremely elaborated upon Rick's thoughts way more than he is capable of, let's go back to Fantano. Fantano starts digging into Rick's take on quantized music, and Fantano says that really the genre that has this issue the most is rock.
From this point, Rick goes on a whole diatribe about quantizing and drum machines and drum parts and grooves sounding super rigid and just soulless as a result of the way we've kind of locked things to the grid in the studio, in the DAW, which again, we're also doing like a lot of glossing over key and vital parts of music history here. We're also making a lot of presumptions with these points, because what Rick is saying here totally ignores the rich history of music, pop and otherwise, that involves like drum machine tech and was arguably very creative, very influential, just as good as any Led Zeppelin or Pat Metheny record. For example, there are drum machines all over Prince's Purple Rain. Are we really going to sit here and argue that there's less like artistic merit to Prince's Purple Rain because there's drum beats on that record that are locked to the grid of a drum machine? And from here, also think about the ways in which drum machines and sequence beats revolutionized electronic music, led to the advent of hip hop. Honestly and truly, the only genre of music that this is like sort of an issue for is rock.
This is an instance where I'm actually kind of in agreement with Rick and with Fantano. I'm kind of torn. Like I just said, locking music to a grid on tempo is a surefire way of making things sound really tight, which can be super impactful, but it also can lose the human element and make things feel more unnatural, or in another way, very safe. I mean, yeah, if you have gridded music, there are other conventions you can break on other metrics or parameters to make it feel more unsafe. But if we're looking at one metric, one parameter, on-grid is more safe than off-grid. On the other hand, Fantano is correct that there has been a ton of music that has been locked to the grid that has been fantastic. I think there can be merit in music that is locked to a grid. Absolutely. But if the majority of what we listen to is locked to a grid, I think that this could potentially present a problem. I would have to do more study and more thought on this before I would come to a definitive answer. But my intuitions and my life experience really point me towards there being a potential problem in society and in culture if we start listening to exclusively gridded music. Something just doesn't feel right about that. My biggest issue with Fantano here is pretending as though Rick actually put remotely this amount of thought before he started speaking. He is a boomer's boomer. If you've watched like 3 videos that he has made on new music in the last 5 years, you would realize he's not a very meta thinker. I think there was a more charitable way of interpreting what Rick was trying to say. I did that. Fantano chose not to do that for whatever reason. Like Fantano talks about how sampling and drum machines and blah, 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 all valid art, all driving and innovating, blah, 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 blah. Yes, sampling is an art, and it's a valid one, but it's not as impressive as playing the parts for real. Just like me curating what images Midjourney spits out to me is not as impressive as drawing an awesome picture myself. Removing more of the human element and potential for error starts, one, taking more risk out of the proposition and out of the endeavor, which makes it less impressive, but two, it drives it more towards homogenization. I don't think it's the root cause of homogenization, but I think it certainly contributes towards it. And while you did make some great counters in your argument, I think you may be sticking Rick with positions he doesn't actually hold, and partially it's because he just doesn't know how to freaking talk. Fantano sticking Rick with positions he doesn't hold will be a recurring theme.
I do hear a fair amount of rock music recordings or metal music recordings where the drums or the grooves are, yes, very snapped to the grid, and sometimes that is so much so the case that the drum parts sound just flat and soulless and boring and mechanical and awful to listen to. But I mean, that's not really the technology's issue. That's the issue of the artists applying the technology, sucking at applying the technology.
On this, we can absolutely agree.
I mean, I get that a John Bonham drum beat with a shuffle doesn't sound good when you quantize it, but that doesn't mean all quantizing is wrong or bad.
I don't think Rick ever claimed this. I mean, like I said, granted, he's not really good at formulating words to convey his thoughts. But again, I think you're sticking him with a position he never claimed to have.
From here, Rick is kind of quick to assume that current day tech basically streamlines everything about music creation rather than adding more complications actually sometimes. And his key example of that is a drum set.
If we aggregate time lost versus time saved, 1,000% music tech streamlines the process. Are you high? There is no question about this. Saying it takes a lot of time to sift through already recorded material and that makes it more complicated or more complex misses the point entirely. Without the music tech available to make it easy enough to have that problem in the first place, the music genres you're talking about wouldn't exist. I can't possibly think of one circumstance where music technology has made things more complicated, other than giving you more options to choose from. If you can think of something that is harder to do today because of music tech as opposed to easier, please let me know in the comments. Just by the nature of tech advancement, this seems not only counterintuitive, but completely illogical. It's like if human beings invented a spoon that melted over 50 degrees Fahrenheit, and we decided this is what we're eating soup with from now on. There's zero chance anyone's using that spoon. Fantano then goes on to cite Rick's comparison of recording drums to using sampled drums. He does admit that recording real drums is hard, but then he drops this gem.
Which you could play in any manner that you like, tune in any manner that you like, mic in any manner that you like. Yes, that is true. And while yes, that is time consuming, so is going through 1,000 snare one-shots in Logic.
Are you fucking serious? That's like saying it's harder to choose a dish to eat at McDonald's than it is to cook a meal at home. I don't need to explain why this is stupid. Comparing the difficulty of recording one good drum sound to having to choose between thousands of great recorded drum sounds that you didn't have to record is absolute nonsense. And to this point, I think Fantano was just huffing some straight copium because he was triggered that Beato seemed to be talking down to genres that he really likes. And because of that, he felt the need to justify their workload.
And I feel like also this point that Rick is making is maybe a wee bit classist and ignores the economic barrier to entry that a lot of musicians who would like to produce face when they are trying to think up or come up with drum parts for their songs. I'm sure many of them would actually prefer, if they had the resources to do so, to actually be in front of a drum kit in a studio with a producer and engineer to capture all these sounds and so on and so forth.
What the fuck are you doing? At this point, you are intentionally misrepresenting Rick so that you can impugn his character so that you can win moral points with your woke shitheads who are on your stupid fucking channel. Rick came up in a time when it took more money to do less in the music industry, and musicians were more broke than today. To insinuate that Rick Beato does not understand the plight of the poor musician is strictly disingenuous. Rick may not be the deepest thinker, but he is not deaf to the plight of the poor musician. There is nothing cringier than Marxist virtue signaling. Just seriously. Oh, I only said it was a wee bit classist. Then why even bring it up? What was the point? If it's so inconsequential that it's like, oh, I wasn't really insulting him, why the fuck did you say it in the first place? It obviously was consequential enough to mention. Go touch some fucking grass, Fantano. Spend 3 months in Middle America, Fantano. Hunt for your own food and have to wipe your ass with leaves, Fantano.
But not everybody who wants to produce a song has the money for a drum kit or studio time or a producer's time. Honestly, I don't think that should keep them from making music if they want to.
Again, Rick never said this. There are so many things wrong with what Fantano just said. I don't believe he seriously holds this position. The position that musicians are too poor to record their own instruments. I don't think Fantano seriously means about the ability to record drums. I think Fantano is talking about the ability to compete with quality drums. I'm trying to be good faith to him. That would be a more fair statement. And I do love that people with lower income or just less experience are able to get access to a big studio sound for cheaper than ever before. But chalking this up as classism is not just a stretch. It is an intentional misrepresentation of the conversation around the homogenization of music.
For somebody who is as smart and as studied and as experienced as Fantano, given how surgical some of Fantano content can be, I feel like the statements made are beneath him. I feel like they could all kind of be addressed and deflated with one single sentence. Things being more difficult does not mean the end result is good. And I will say this again, adding in the context that Rick seems to be very concerned with the fact that producing sounds, guitar amplifiers, fake drums, so on and so forth, it's all too easy to use. So once more, I will say that things being harder to do does not mean that the end result is better.
This is an absolutely fair point, and I agree. It doesn't directly address the music homogenization point, but I think that it's good pushback against Rick's more boomer intuitions. That needs to be said. Easier does not necessarily mean worse or bad.
In the 50s and in the 60s and in the 70s, these eras of music that Rick and a lot of his fans often will just sort of like worship and point to as like, this is the golden era. This was like when things were perfect. This is when people were doing the work and walking uphill 10 miles to and from school. Yeah, that is true. There were a lot of difficulties that came with the process of music creation during that time, but a lot of the music that was coming out around that era was still trash. Complete and utter garbage, like, bad, shitty novelty albums, annoying, gentrified vocal jazz bullshit, crappy, kitschy pop orchestra records, holiday shit.
Again, excellent point. Many boomers fetishize classic music and classic records as if all of the old music sounded that good back then, and it certainly didn't. To bolster Fantano's point more, Rick goes off on a whole tangent later in the video where he talks about how buying records back in the day made people value music more. If we are going to accept that as a true statement, what Rick doesn't realize is it also made people value trash music a lot more too. If you were purchasing an album, you were hoping it wasn't gonna suck. Because in many cases, kids were only allowed to buy a certain number of albums a year, or maybe they could only afford a certain number of albums a year. And you would wear out those records, the good tracks and the filler tracks. You would learn to love those crappy filler tracks. I had a similar experience with CDs when I was younger, because my parents very much limited what CDs I could not only purchase, but even be exposed to when I was a child. And a lot of it was oldies, and if we know anything about even some of the better albums from the oldies, there's tons of filler that's pretty bleh at best. And because that's all the music that I had, I learned to love those songs, even though deep down realizing, yeah, these are not great. We can learn to love trash because of lack of access to something that's not trash. And we can justify that by saying, oh, it was really hard to make. I'm happy Fantano brought this up, and it's something that Rick and his audience need to hear more often. Not that Rick doesn't have some valid points or ideas, but I think he needs to hear this type of stuff more often so he can better refine his point of view and his arguments.
And without opening another can of worms, I feel like Rick's final point here sort of ignores the effects of things like capitalism and audience demand and Spotify algorithms and how they all sort of like toxify the music consumption circle these days. Meanwhile, Rick over here is like concerned trolling about phones.
Agreed. Consumerism and music as a business are far closer to the roots of the problem than the music technology. Leaps and bounds agree. It's these cultural characteristics that give rise to the technology and how the technology is used. I don't see any way of making a good argument against that. If you can, please let me know in the comments. And I think this is a massive blind spot in Rick's point of view because he was kind of in the studio system for a while. And while he was in there, he made tons of friends. He got to know these people face to face. It wasn't just a corporation or just like this system. It's a good call out by Fantano. This is where Fantano gets to the thesis of Rick's video finally. I've already addressed this earlier in the video, so we're going to move on to the next thing.
The only way that I feel like you could genuinely harbor this take in your soul is if, again, you're only looking at the ways in which technology have impacted some, not even the entirety, some sects of the genre of rock music, and that's it.
No, okay, I disagree there. There is absolutely homogenization happening, and a notable part of that is the music technology. And this affects pop and rap more than it affects rock, in my opinion. This is not to take anything away from the sound designers or arrangers for pop and rap, but the hit makers stick to a formula or stick to a group of formulas, and there are more people chasing hits than ever before. A bigger contributor to this is the motivation to make this music in the first place. I hope that Fantano and I could agree on that. But making music creation more user-friendly and streamlined definitely also incentivizes people to choose these more vanilla options, go in the same direction that everyone else is chasing. To Steelman Fantano, I think he is trying to look at the grander scope of music, not just the hits or the mainstream. And in that regard, yes, music tech has helped some artists become more expressive and more nuanced than in the past. But I think it's also very easy to be like, oh, you're not thinking about the bigger picture, man, when you might actually not be thinking about the bigger picture, because it's very easy to say, oh, there's all these like really neat niches happening everywhere where all this really cool stuff is happening because of music tech. It's like, yeah, but like how many hard people on the planet are actually consuming that? And how many hard people on the planet are consuming? Even though Hot 100 is a minority of the music that gets released all the time, I don't know if we have the data to say that it's the minority of the listening share, the market share. And that's something worth at least looking at. It's just to be fair, it's something worth looking at. I think Rick's primary problem is that he's terrible at expressing himself clearly and accurately. And I think Fantano's primary problem is that he's taking Rick too seriously, as though every video that he makes is this like very well considered thesis, when Rick is really sometimes just a boomer yelling at clouds. How come people can't tell my guitar's out of tune? Who fucking cares, Rick? Rick, Bonanza's on. Sit down and shut the hell up, please. He shits out his shower thoughts as a video. The YouTube algorithm strokes his ego, and his audience injects the copium and the member berries raw directly into their veins. Rick then goes into the second part of his video where he talks about music consumption and how he thinks it's too easy to consume music. Rick uses a sync as a mediocre and drawn out metaphor for streaming music. Then he tries to say something about recycling and how much new music is added to Spotify. This section really didn't make any sense. It was like a Joe Biden fever dream. He uses all of these disparate and meandering thoughts to try and show that young people don't value music like we did in the old days. I just fundamentally disagree with this premise and position. Yes, the value of music is decreasing by leaps and bounds. Yes, that is partially because of how easy it is to consume, and because of the volume of which it's being printed or published or whatever you want to call it. But I think this misses two much larger points. One, who is gatekeeping what you are listening to as a passive consumer? Two, what are the incentives for making music? And what are the incentives for consuming music? Fundamentally, I don't think it's the technology that's the issue. I don't think people have been given a good enough reason to leave the comfort of the illusion of choice in media. If you expect them to find better music, you need to give them a reason good enough to not be a comfortable fat ass. This is America we're talking about, okay? If I don't have a government subsidized Big Mac delivered straight up my colon so that I can have cancer and then live off of Medicare the rest of my life, I may as well commit treason. Point is, if they want to find better music, they actually need to put that work in to find that better music. And that, like, good luck getting lazy asshole. I can't get people to look at my fucking channel page to see when I've uploaded a video. If the YouTube algorithm doesn't shove it in front of them on their home screen, I basically didn't upload a video today. And my audience is better than average. That's for damn sure. Throughout all of the history of recorded music, this has been a thing of just passively consuming what's in front of you. And making all music consumption more inconvenient is not going to change this. I think there's definitely a conversation to be had about the devaluing of the economic value of music in the market because of higher volume over saturation, but I don't think that that directly makes people less passionate about art. I can see why you might think that because, like you say, sweat equity, it is a thing, but I think that art transcends all of that by a lot because money does not have inherent meaning unless you want to give the numbers inherent meaning. But the beauty, the transcendence of the art does have inherent meaning. And that is, in my opinion, more valuable than the money itself. The hang up here for me is the word value that Rick is using. Are we talking about economic value or are we talking about emotional aesthetic value? Because these are not perfectly interchangeable. Anyway, Fantano pretty much agrees with me, and then he goes on to make an extended point about bootlegging tapes and CDs, a fair point to make.
Kids don't care about music anymore because it's free and they don't need to work a job to be able to pay for a record that they want at the record store that they've been desiring, totally ignoring like the culture of record taping during that time and how, people used to record albums for each other that they may have not even had to pay for. There used to actually be these stickers on records just that used to say, "Oh, taping is killing the music industry," when in fact it wasn't. It's just the record labels crying wolf once again. And I'm sure Rick is old enough to remember a time when he probably had a friend of his or so, record a couple of LPs for him onto a cassette or something.
It directly addresses what Rick was talking about, but again, I don't think Rick has clearly talked about his blah blah. He's bad at talking about himself, as demonstrated by his meandering bullshit. And with Fantano's point about bootlegging, I imagine Rick would come back at Fantano with something like how music being physical in a medium will have more inherent value for various reasons. I'm not saying I fully agree with either one of these guys. It just seems like a conversation that completely missed itself because Rick does not know how to organize his thoughts.
And, honestly, for my own fucking sanity, I wish what Rick was saying was 110% true. Because if it actually was the case that just kids don't care about music anymore, do you know how free of harassment and bullshit and psychosis my mentions would be on any given day? I mean, the music from the artist they're defending must matter something to them on some level, even though they're just streaming it for free on Spotify.
Yeah, that's a good point. No notes.
I just feel like this video from Rick is beneath him.
This should not be a surprise because most of the rant videos that Rick Beato releases are beneath him. Okay, I think I've had enough of this. There's two reasons I don't make videos about these topics very often. One, unless there's some good algorithm bait like Rick Beato and Anthony Fantano, my audience will not even be notified that I uploaded a fucking video. Two, these are incredibly complicated issues without 100% clear answers that require a lot of time and thought to properly organize and scrutinize. I don't think Rick put remotely enough time in scrutinizing and refining his own arguments before he made this video. Very on brand for Rick. I think there's definitely a worthy conversation to be had between Anthony Fantano and Rick Beato. I think that they both actually have great points that should be talked about, but I also think it'll require both sides better articulating their positions without having their junk wrapped squarely around their feelings. I don't think we're going to move forward in this conversation in any meaningful way until we can better define our terms, and try and understand the other side's point of view. Till then, it's just gonna be Boomer versus Coomer, just straw man central. I hope that this video provided some level of clarity and maybe pushed the conversation forward like 1 yard. There is a real phenomenon worth addressing here, both with the homogenization of music, but also with how amazing music technology has made it for the independent musician. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Maybe I'll make a longer video expressing my point of view on all of this later. There's a lot to untangle, and it's very difficult to organize all these thoughts. Subscribe to Night School to support videos like this and support me, and I love you, and good day, good night, God bless. Shalom!